The Jehovah's Witnesses have been hit with a $100 million lawsuit where the plaintiff, an ex-JW who's now in her late 20s and living in the UK, states that she was repeatedly sexually assaulted by a top male official in her congregation, that Watchtower knew about it, and they did nothing. The plaintiff, Stella Cristina Gomez de Souza, is suing the governing body, the Jehovah's Witnesses Centralized Authority, based in upstate New York, after being offered a measly, insulting amount of $50,000 to basically shut her up and bury the story, which is not the first time this has happened. This is very much their MO. But as of now, it seems she has refused to settle. She's demanding $100 million in punitive damages, asking for a jury trial, and demanding the governing body testify, which, if that happens, will make it a groundbreaking case against the organization. Yeah, so I read the documents. It's extremely graphic and horrific, and I will not be repeating it here. Us ex-JWs, we know about this stuff, but in case for whatever reason you're tuning in for the first time or you're not aware of this is not a case of a few bad apples. The Jehovah's Witnesses organization is a putrid go ahead and write this down. A putrid, festering hellhole of complicity, co-conspirators, and cover-ups for decades. All right, so I'm just going to read through this so you can see for yourself. It says, plaintiff, a 12-year-old child at the time, 12 years old, lacked the capacity to consent to any sexual contact. Her submission to, I think his name is Angelo in the papers, Angelo Rovieso. I don't know if I'm saying that right. I really don't give a fuck. I hope he rots in hell. All right, her submission to his assaults was obtained solely through fear, coercion, and psychological domination, rooted in the spiritual authority defendants gave him. That's what they do to Jehovah's Witness kids. You sit there, you shut up, and you listen to authority. All right, any seed of doubt you have, any gut feeling that's telling you when your intuition is talking to you and saying someone or something seems off, it is immediately dismissed. There's zero, let me repeat that, zero guardrails in the Jehovah's Witnesses. Defendants maintained a rigid and centralized hierarchy through which the governing body in New York exercised ultimate control over the appointment, discipline, and supervision of all elders and ministerial servants worldwide. Authority flowed downward from the governing body to branch offices and then to local congregations, leaving no independent discretion at the local level. This centralized structure placed the governing body and Watchtower entities in direct control of ministerial oversight, making their knowledge and response to reports of misconduct foreseeable and actionable. Defendants knew, or should have known, that Rovieso had engaged in inappropriate conduct with minors and exhibited predatory behavior inconsistent with his ministerial role. Despite this knowledge, defendants failed to restrict his access to children, monitor his conduct, or investigate prior complaints. Over here it says elders within the Estrada de Fonte congregation and regional overseers had received earlier warnings about Rovieso's inappropriate behavior with minors, including concerns raised by families in nearby congregations, but no protective action was taken. Those reports were handled internally, consistent with defendants, aka Watchtower, consistent with defendants' policy that discouraged contact with secular authorities and required elders to seek branch approval before taking any disciplinary measures. This failure to intervene enabled Rovieso's misconduct to continue unchecked. Defendants' gross negligence was not an isolated failure, but part of a systemic pattern of reckless indifference to the welfare of minors, as evidenced by similar reports of child sexual abuse and cover-ups across multiple jurisdictions. Their deliberate refusal to protect victims or alert civil authorities created a foreseeable and extreme risk of harm that materialized in plaintiffs' repeated assaults and lasting trauma. These actions, conceived and directed from defendants' New York headquarters and replicated by their Brazilian branch office, were not isolated failures, but the product of an entrenched, global policy of obstruction and concealment. Defendants prioritized institutional reputation over the safety of the children entrusted to their care, systematically silencing victims and protecting abusers. This is absolutely horrific. And okay, so it happened on their watch. All right, they figured out who the bad guys are. At the top, the people who did it, What about the victim? Can't possibly get any worse. Let's see how they treat victims, shall we? Incredulously, after detailing the numerous assaults and rapes to the committee, Roviezo was called into this meeting, and the committee demanded that Miss Souza repeat everything she shared with the committee in front of Roviezo. Having to explain to 5 male members of the Judicial Committee and her abuser basically what her abuser did to her was incredibly traumatizing for Miss Souza. It was as if Miss Souza was being abused all over again. Several weeks later, Miss Souza was informed that she could no longer serve as a regular pioneer for Jehovah's Witnesses. The following week, it was announced to the congregation that Miss Souza was no longer a pioneer, but no announcement was made concerning Roviezo. In other words, Jehovah's Witnesses punished Miss Souza for reporting the sexual abuse she was subjected to, and did nothing to punish the actual abuser. Miss Souza, the victim, 12 years old, was called a whore and a bad influence. Her friends started to distance themselves from her, and she was no longer welcome at events. It even went so far that Miss Souza started receiving death threats from members of the congregation, threatening to kill her if she pursued the matter further. The elders' egregious handling of Miss Souza's report followed written directives issued by defendants' headquarters requiring all allegations of child abuse to be referred to the branch office rather than civil authorities. Those same policies cautioned elders against interviewing victims without branch approval and instructed them to maintain confidentiality to avoid, quote, bringing reproach on Jehovah's name. In accordance with these organizational rules, defendants knowingly suppressed a credible report of child sexual abuse, allowed Roviezo to remain in ministry, and exposed Miss Souza to further trauma. Miss Souza, like countless children who have been abused in the Jehovah's Witnesses, was explicitly told by the elders to, quote, leave it in Jehovah's hands. She deserves every damn dime. I'll keep you posted. Thank you for watching.